Catullus 51. Il mi pare se Deo videtur, il si face superare divos, qui sedens adver susidenti dente, spectate daudit, dulce ridentem misero quod omnes, ripit sensus mihi nam simulte, lesbiax spexi nihil les supermi, vocis in ore, lingua sed torpet tenuis subartis, flamma demanat sonitus suopte, tintinant aures, geminate guntur, lumina nocte. Otium Catulle tibi molestest, oti exultas nimiam que gestis, oti et reges prius et beatas, perdidit orbes. That man seems to me to be equal to a god. That man, if it is right, seems to surpass the gods, who, sitting opposite, sees and hears you again and again, sweetly laughing. A thing that snatches all senses from miserable me. For as soon as I behold you, Lesbia, nothing remains for me of a voice in my mouth. But my tongue is paralyzed, the thin flame flows down beneath the limb, ears ring with their own sound, the eyes are covered with twin night. Leisure is troublesome for you, Catullus. You exult in too much free time dancing. Free time destroys both kings and wealthy cities earlier. Horace 1.13. Cum tu Lydia telefi, servicem roseam, seria telefi, laudas brachia meam, fervens difficili, bile tu metiacor, tunc nec mens mihi nec couleur, certa sede manet, humor et inginas, fortem labitur arguens, quam lentis penitus, macrerer ignibus, oro su tibi canidos, turparunt humeros, immodicae mero, rixae si vepuer fuens, impressit memorem, dente labris notam, non si mensitas audias, speres perpetuem, durcia barbare, laedantem toscula quae Venus, quinta parte sui nectaris imbuit, felices terent ampilus, quos in rupta tenet, copula nec malis, divulsus querrimoniis, suprema sitius, solvita mordie. When you, Lydia, praise the rosy neck of Telephus, the waxen arms of Telephus, alas, my boiling liver swells with difficult bile. Then neither my mind nor color remains in a certain seat, and the moisture glides secretly onto my cheek, showing how deeply I am tormented with lingering flames. I am burned, whether the fight's immoderate because of unmixed wine, make ugly your pure shoulders, or the raging boy has pressed a mindful mark on the lips with his tooth. Do not, if you should hear me enough, hope for him continually striking, roughly your sweet mouth, which Venus has filled with a fifth portion of her nectar. Thrice lucky and more, whom the unbroken bonds hold, and whom love, not having been torn apart by evil complaints, will not break up quicker than the final day. In Ode 1.13, Horace describes the speaker's jealousy that his beloved Lydia has fallen in love with another man. Lydia praises Telephus's body enthusiastically, and it is this praise that spurs Horace's criticism of him. He turns her praise of his kisses and waxen arms to suggest something of an abusive relationship. Although Horace starts by praising Lydia's lover's Telephus with his rosy neck and waxen arms, when he turns this praise against him, he expresses how his boiling liver swells with the difficult bile at this praise. This criticism is seen in the lines, Telefi cervicem roseam, seria telefi, laudas brachia, meam, fervens difficili, bile tumet iacor. You praise the rosy neck of Telephus, the waxen arms of Telephus, alas, my boiling liver swells with difficult bile. This criticism on Telephus specifically comes to light further when he worries that Telephus will spoil her beauty with what he suggests to be an abusive relationship in the words he chooses to describe his actions with her. Su tibi canidos turparunt umeros immodicae mero rixaisi vepuer fuens impressit memorem denterabris notem. Whether the fights, immoderate because of unmixed wine, make ugly your pure shoulders, or the raging boy has pressed a mindful mark on the lips with his tooth. With these words like immoderate, fights, ugly, raging, mark, and tooth, it's suggesting a very violent relationship, a very rough relationship. And it's immoderate. It's not controlled. It's kind of out of control. It's careless. And the raging boy, he's angry. Beyond just a simple word as angry. And furthermore, the mark on the lips with his tooth, it was mindful. It was on purpose. And that kind of suggests this purposefully violent or painful or rough or permanent relationship that's not very appealing compared to what the idealized relationship he describes is in the final stanza. Something else that Horace does in this poem is that he leaves some of the words open to interpretation. They kind of have an air of mystery to them. So, for example, the most commonly accepted reading of Felices terret amplius quos irruptatenet copula nec malis divolsus querrimonius supremacitius solvet amor diem is thrice lucky and more, whom the unbroken bond holds, and whose love, not having been torn apart by evil complaints, will not break up quicker than the final day. This expresses how any couple is extremely lucky to have their idealized love last. Inrupta is taken to mean unbroken, and nec is understood twice, once with dissolvus, and again with solvet. As argued in CF Arcana, Time and the Erotic in Horace's Odes 121 through 28, however, this could also be interpreted in a very different way. Thrice lucky and more, whom the uninterrupted bond holds, and a love torn apart by evil complaints, will not break up sooner than the final day. This would describe a love that has been faced with problems and conflicts, but has endured regardless, and through its struggles, it has survived until the day the couple dies. This is a very different interpretation from the former translation. Ultimately, through Horace's criticism of Telephus, he uses a lot of crass and fiery language to describe his own reactions to their relationship, such as being tormented with lingering flames, being burned, and his boiling liver swelling with difficult bile. This, however, doesn't make Horace come out looking very appealing. In fact, he uses similar language to describe his own reactions as he does to describe Telephus himself in his criticisms. This equates them in some sense. Whether this was an intentional connection between him and Telephus in order to show Lydia how he is just as good as Telephus and better as he is criticizing him, or whether it was unintentional with him accidentally looking hypocritical is unclear. Unclear just like his ending. The one stanza which seems a little bit out of place because it ends so ambiguously with the rest of the poem. While the rest of the poem has been exceptionally specific, this one doesn't make much sense at all in the context. Who are the happy people in the end? Do they relate to Lydia, Telephus, and Horace? Or the speaker, if Horace is not the true speaker here? Or are they merely representative of an idealized relationship to contrast Lydia and Telephus's relationship? Horace, of course, does not tell us. In Catullus 51, the first and third stanzas are based on Sappho's 31st poem, which is why the scansion is sapphic. It is thought to be the first poem about Lesbia in the cycle of love poems to her that Catullus created. Now, just like with Horace 1.13, this poem ends up being about his jealousy over a man with the girl he loves, and just like Horace, Catullus begins by talking indirectly about how the man has been praised, and then abruptly reverses that praise and shifts the focus to be on how the speaker is the better choice of a man. With both 1.13 and 51, the poems are structured very similarly overall. It goes, alleged praise of the man, and I say alleged because they want to make it clear that they don't agree necessarily. Horace by saying that Lydia praises him this way, and Catullus by saying he only seems to be this way. Alright, next, how painfully it affects him to see her with this other man, and then how she makes him freeze. His color and mind stay still, as Horace says, and his tongue and voice are paralyzed, as Catullus puts it. And finally, with the last stanza, some vague and seemingly unrelated comment. Something different about Catullus' poem to Horace is that when Catullus finishes expressing his poem, he comes to the conclusion of the poem. Horace, in comparison, after he finishes expressing how she affects him, then moves to focus more on how Telephus is a terrible choice through his rough and possibly abusive actions. Catullus really has one stanza focusing on how she affects him and how he loves her, whilst Horace talks about how she affects him and now how it affects him when he sees her with him, and then how he feels bad for her and more about how he's bad for her, and then how she's better than him, and it just ends up being 3 whole stanzas talking about how ultimately this guy is terrible. But because there's so many different focuses, it's not quite as concise as Catullus's. Which is why if I were a relationship guru, I would tell Catullus that he was doing it right, and tell Horace that he's focusing more on the boyfriend than on the girl he wants. Lydia is more likely in this case to dump the boyfriend and then be single, compared to how Lesbia, after reading Catullus' poem, might dump her boyfriend for Catullus because she clearly now knows how much Catullus loves her in comparison. This shows how, with Horace, when he uses all those terrible words to describe the boyfriend and how he's feeling, it equates them both, and doesn't quite make as an effective of a love poem, as much as a critical poem of her boyfriend. In this case, Horace lets jealousy get in the way of his words, while Catullus seems to let it spur and inspire his words to show her how much he loves her. Ultimately, both poems start with praise and turn to criticism. They worry about the relationship she has with the other man, and they leave room for interpretation in their words. They strive to have their girls understand that they are the better man, whether that be through praising their own love for the girl, or by racking down on her relationship with her current lover. And of course, they both left the last stanza as being ambiguous and open to interpretation. A strange end to 2 love poems seemingly grounded in specificity. In the end, the structure of the poems is the biggest comparison, because although they are set up in strikingly similar ways, in what inspires a poem, and in the ultimately vague way they conclude them, they have different lasting effects in the end. Horace focusing more on the boyfriend, and Catullus more on the girl.